Hi, it's Chris here. Welcome to my video. This is the second of a series of videos I'm doing on the new wave of British heavy metal. So less of a genre, more of a movement, heavy metal movement in the late 70s, early 80s in the UK. I finished the last video sharing the fact that in 1979 I went to see Whitesnake, not part of the new wave of British heavy metal, but on that tour they were supported by a band called Marseille, which probably were part of the new wave of British heavy metal. This was just one single from 1979 called Over and Over. They were okay, they were a bit Def Leppard-ish possibly. Their guitarist was a guy called Neil Buchanan, who went on to front the BBC children's art programme called Art Attack. So he had quite a change in career later on in life. Also 1979 on Jet Records, we've got the first single from Girl featuring Phil Collen, who went on to play with Def Leppard on Pyromania and of course Hysteria. This is My Number. It's the same song, I think, on both sides, clear vinyl. Great track actually, a bit more glam metal than new wave of British heavy metal. Iron Maiden produced their Soundhouse tapes, which is very collectible, very rare, very expensive. Less expensive, less rare is the Soundhouse tapes part 2 from Praying Mantis, another band who came to prominence during this time. And this is Soundhouse tapes part 2. This is Captured City, backed with Johnny Cool. They also did a 12-inch version of that as well, which features an additional song called The Ripper. This is quintessential new wave of British heavy metal in terms of its look. There we are. This is Give 'Em Hell by Witchfind. I saw this band support Def Leppard actually in 1980 at Bournemouth Town Hall. They weren't very good at all, and in fact, you know, whilst this looks very demonic and very scary, the music really isn't actually. Not that great production. It's on Rondelay Records, which I think is a punk label, and production lets it down a little bit, but I love the cover of that. It's great. Much better is this one on Trial Records by a band called Trespass, which is called One of These Days, which is very Lizzie influenced actually, and is a really, really good track. I think it features on a compilation that I'll show later, but great stuff. Thin Lizzy lost their guitarist Brian Robertson. He went on to form Wild Horses, again not part of the new wave of British heavy metal, but they were formed at the same time. So Brian Robertson from Thin Lizzy. Jimmy Bain, he was the bass player in Rainbow when they produced Rainbow Rising. So this is Criminal Tendencies, back with a non-album track called The Rapist, which is one of their best songs actually, despite the title. And then we've got Sounds magazine. So this was, you know, a magazine that really championed the cause of the new wave of British heavy metal. So Girls' School on the front in 1979. They were one of the early new wave of British heavy metal bands, despite the fact they were all female, which was unusual in rock at that time. In here we've got a lot of kind of skids, ruts, all that kind of stuff, but we've also got an article on Girl, an article on Girls' School, and we've also got the emergence of the heavy metal chart, which appeared every week in this. And there's some, you know, quite interesting stuff, some standard stuff on there, you know, Rush and Riot, I think, are on there, Montrose, AC/DC, but also Praying Mantis, Girl and Iron Maiden appear on there as well. And it was based on a place called the Heavy Metal Soundhouse, I think, the Heavy Metal Bandwagon, which took place in Kingsbury, northwest London. Very influential in terms of people's listening habits actually, via that heavy metal chart in sounds. Def Leppard's second single came out in 79. This is Wasted, which is just a fantastic riff, back with Hello America, an early version of that, which was later re-released. I'll come to that in a moment. Neat Records were formed in the late 70s. The first two records on Neat Records weren't heavy metal at all. This was the first one that was. This is the third single from that label, and the debut single from the Tigers of Pang Tang called Don't Touch Me There, which features Jess Cox on vocals, who wasn't a great vocalist but certainly gave the band a certain sound. Saw them on tour. They supported, I think, Gillan, someone else as well, I can't remember. Second single from Girl, this is called Do You Love Me, which is the Kiss song, so a cover of that, and then a re-recorded version of Hello America. So maybe there was a bit of a backlash from this, because people were just presuming that all they were doing by releasing this is trying to get into the American market, but still new wave of British heavy metal, despite the fact that Joe Elliott, the singer, says they're not. But you know, the logo, the name, just the sound and the look of the band, really kind of archetypal new wave of British heavy metal, as was this. As I said to you on the last video, no AC/DC, no Saxon, so there's quite a lot of stuff on here that's very influenced by AC/DC. This has got some great stuff, you know, Wheels of Steel, 747's on here, but Motorcycle Man and Machine Gun are just great tracks. That's a superb heavy metal album. Less good but interesting is the debut album from Girls, is Sheer Greed, with Phil Collin from Def Leppard. Some good tracks on here, musicianship is pretty good. I think this guy here, what's his name, can't remember his name, Phil Lewis, he went on to play in LA Guns. The debut single from Diamond Head, Sweet and Innocent, great track, and the debut single from Iron Maiden, Running Free, and this actually made it onto Top of the Pops, and they did one of those very rare Top of the Pops live performances. So Iron Maiden appeared twice on this. This is Metal for Mothers, compiled by Neil Kay, who run the heavy metal bandwagon Soundhouse in northwest London. A real mix of stuff on here. So a band called Ethel the Frog, Angel Witch appears on here, called Baphomet, which is a great track actually. But Bootliggers by Nuts. Nuts were kind of a mid-70s band, they weren't really new wave of British heavy metal. Captured City is on here, the Praying Mantis song that appeared on the Soundhouse. EF Band and Sledgehammer, and 2 songs, including Rothschild, by Iron Maiden. This is from, is this 1980? I think we might be into 1980 now. Yeah, we are in 1980. The second single by Diamond Head, signed by Brian Tatler and Sean Harris. I met them actually in 1980. Great lads, great band. The B-side of this, Helpless, is fantastic. Shoot Out the Lights is great as well. And then we've got on Valiant Records, Sledgehammer by Sledgehammer. They were a bit of a strange old band, but again, one of those new wave of British heavy metal bands that names a song after their band name. Live album by Quartz. This was a very early new wave of British heavy metal band. They formed in the mid-70s, I think. Lost their keyboard player, Jeff Nichols, to Black Sabbath in the late 70s. He played as kind of like an invisible member of Black Sabbath from Birmingham. One of their albums, not this one I don't think, but one of their albums was produced by Tony Iommi. They also did a version of Mountains, Nantucket Sleigh Ride. Good version of it actually, and that came out in this kind of black and white picture sleeve, which was a real look of the new wave of British heavy metal. Def Leppard in 1980 produced their debut. Slightly different to the other new wave of British heavy metal in that the production was reasonably good, although it wasn't as metal as I thought it was going to be, more hard rock. But, you know, some fantastic songs on here. Rock Brigade, Hello America, Could Be You, When the Walls Came Tumbling Down, Overture, Rocks Off Wasted. Great album, and certainly an album that really defined this particular movement, despite the fact that Joe Elliott didn't want any part of the new wave of British heavy metal. Third single from Girl, Hollywood Tease, a remix version from the album. Questionable lyrics in places, which is a shame because it's a fantastic song. And around that time, although not British, but certainly had some British players with him, and a real favourite of British audience was Michael Schenker, and this is Armed and Ready by the Michael Schenker Group on clear vinyl from 1980. Michael Schenker had been replaced in UFO by a guy called Paul Chapman, who had played in Lone Star, and they produced No Place to Run. Obviously not part of the new wave of British heavy metal, and influence definitely on the new wave of British heavy metal. And I saw them on that tour as well, and I can't remember who toured with them, but it was one of the new wave of British heavy metal bands actually. I can't remember who. Wild Horses brought out their debut album. It's quite weak production, and they always struggled because Jimmy Bain, who played bass, also sung, and he really couldn't. And their material wasn't strong enough, but I saw them at Bournemouth Town Hall. They were a really strong band. The debut from Iron Maiden came out in 1980 as well, and this is absolutely archetypal Iron Maiden. And what's interesting about this band is they haven't changed much. That's the amazing thing about this band. Despite all the kind of trends and everything else, they've kept the logo, they've kept the imagery with this Eddie. You know, when you look at this album, you know what you're going to get. It does exactly what it says on the tin. It's got those creepy kind of Phantom of the Opera, Transylvania, Iron Maiden, all of those kind of scary titles. But this, the production is all right. Who produced it? I think it's possibly... No, it's produced by the production actually is a bit. I was going to say it's Martin Birch, but it's not. He did the next one. Production is a bit thin. It lacks a bit of bass, but just a brilliant album. And this is the copy I bought in 1980. Around that time, we also had Ozzy Osbourne, who'd left Black Sabbath and gone solo with Blizzard of Oz. Again, a really great band. I remember I was hoping to see them in 1980 at Reading, and they pulled out at the last minute, and Slade took their place, who were just amazing actually. But they were out at the same time, and Black Sabbath reinvented themselves with Ronnie James Dio as their singer, and in 1980 produced Heaven and Hell. I actually saw them on this tour. There's the programme there. And the support band for them that night was Angel Witch, who just brought out their debut single, Sweet Danger, backed with the non-album song Flight 19. Great track, love that. This is one of the best new wave of British heavy metal tracks ever. This is Mithra and their Death and Destiny EP. So Death and Destiny and Killer, and on the other side Overlord and UFO. If you haven't got that, you need it if you like this kind of music. Absolutely brilliant on Guardian Records. The third or fourth neat single it was Name, Rank and Serial Number by Fist. Again, kind of a, budget production, budget looking cover, interesting band, not essential but interesting. Witchfind brought out their debut album. Again, it looks kind of demonic and threatening. It's got that tight face. It's really quite thin and not very threatening at all, but as a historical document of that moment in time, absolutely essential. Vardis, who were very much like a real heavy Status Quo, featured a guitarist called Steve Zodiac, who played a Telecaster and was always in bare feet. This was their debut single, If I Were King, and that's on Castle Records. And this is the fifth single from Neat. This is White Spirit. And the song is called Back to the Grind, despite the fact it's called Backs to the Grind on the cover. And Back to the Grind and Cheetah are just great new wave of British heavy metal tracks. Cheetah sounds just like a Gillan song, actually. That features Yannick Gers, who went on to play with Gillan, and also went on to play with Iron Maiden as well. And they also appeared, White Spirit, on the second Metal for Mothers compilation as well. So this has got Trespass, One of These Days, which I mentioned earlier, Easy Money Zero, Dark Star, which is a great song, Chevy. Trespass get 2 tracks on here. I don't think they ever produced an album, Trespass. They just appeared on compilations and the odd single, but they were a great band. So there's Metal for Mothers 2. Another single from Girls' School, Nothing to Lose, kind of a real rock but also a punk energy to this particular band as well. And Whitesnake were going a little bit rockier, so they had their very famous song Fall for Your Loving, signed by Bernie Marsden there, which is nice. Fall for Your Loving, which is a big hit single for them. I saw them on this tour, on the Ready and Willing tour. Really good live band at this point. John Lord was playing with them, Ian Pace. It was like Deep Purple Mark III, really. So really good band. The support band for them is not a new wave of British heavy metal act, but certainly a newish band that features someone who'd been around for a while. And that was Gary Moore's G-Force. And I don't know if you've ever heard White Knuckles Rockin' and Rollin', but White Knuckles, this was Gary Moore trying to out Eddie Van Halen with his shredding. And then a couple more before we'll pause. Single by Samson. So Samson had produced the album Survivor. They then produced this single with new vocalist whose name was Bruce Dickinson, or on here Bruce. So they kept the logo. This guy Thunderstick, I can't remember his real name actually, but he was, I think, the original drummer in Iron Maiden. So Bruce Dickinson singing on that. They also produced their second album. This is much better than Survivor, actually, much better. Some good songs on here, Vice Versa, Hard Times. Again, really kind of archetypal new wave of British heavy metal, down to the kind of imagery and the lyrical content and the sound as well. Girls' School produced their debut album. This is Demolition, Got a load of great songs. Emergency, which I think possibly Motorhead covered as well. Race with the Devil, which is the Gerbit song, the Gun song from many years ago. Take It All Away, their debut. Demolition Boys, also on here. Really, really solid album, actually. Good sound on it. Gillan was still touring, still producing stuff, so we started to see lots of singles now in this kind of era with sew-on patches, because that was really the look on your denim jacket. This is Sleeping on the Job. Budgie were reinventing themselves as well, so they were highly influential on lots of bands who on this era, but they started to reinvent themselves. They lost a guitarist and replaced their guitarist by a guy called John Thomas, I think, and produced this EP, and it's called If Swallowed Do Not Induce Vomiting. I think it's really good, actually. I really like it. It's Panzer Division Destroyed is a great song. So is Wildfire. A completely different sound to their early 70s, 71, 72, 73 sound, but a really good band. Saxon 747, big hit for them, actually, from the Wheels of Steel album. Girls' School, Race with the Devil, back to Take It All Away, a kind of a remix version of that. And then we're into 1980, where we've back end of 1980, where we've got Back in Black. This for me is probably their fourth best album. I know it's their bestseller and one of the best selling albums of all time, but I always struggled a little bit with Brian Johnson as their singer. I was a big Bon Scott fan, so I did see them on that tour, and they were amazing. They were absolutely amazing, but that was around that time. And last couple before we pause, we've got Praying Mantis by Praying Mantis. Again, that kind of idea that you have a song that's the same name as your band. So that was backed with High Roller. That was in 1980. This is the EF band, which I think are a Swedish band, actually, but Self-Made Suicide, which is a good track, actually. Very much part of the new wave British heavy metal. Gillan produced their second album under the name of Gillan. This is the one that includes the Extra Free album. Again, some songs on there, Unchain Your Brain, for example. Are You Sure? Very much in that kind of new wave of British heavy metal sound. I saw them on that tour. There's the Glory Road programme, and they were supported on that tour by White Spirit and Quartz. White Spirit featured Yannick Gers, who then went on to play with Gillan in subsequent years. Raven produced this single. This is the sixth single from Neat Records, Don't Need Your Money, and that is fantastic new wave of British heavy metal. They were if they'd been well managed, I reckon they would have been at the forefront of thrash in subsequent years. Great stuff. Rainbow was starting to go a little bit poppy. They were on tour with a new singer, Graham Bonnet, giving them a very different sound. They went for a much more poppier sound. And they played at they headlined the first ever Monsters of Rock festival that happened in the summer of 1980. And it did have a new wave of British heavy metal band there, Saxon, and they also produced an album that sat alongside it as well, so a nice document of that. And in that summer, and we'll pause here now, but in that summer also we had Reading Festival in 1980, which I did attend, and that had Iron Maiden, Def Leppard, Samson, Crocus, who were a Swiss band. They were playing there. Girl were playing, Pat Travers. It was very much the new wave of British heavy metal. Ozzy Osbourne was meant to play. He was replaced by Slade, who were absolutely amazing. I am actually probably in the background on that single, was cheering away. I was at the back of the crowd. They blew everyone away. Def Leppard had to follow them, and they had a really hard act to follow. So we'll pause there, and then we'll move into part 3 another time. So thanks very much for listening. We'll catch up again soon. Cheers.